Hi guys, and welcome back. For our last issue on social change, we're going to look at two different approaches as usual, and that is incremental versus disruptive change. And it's basically whether or not change should happen really slowly across a long period of time, or change should happen fast and just break shit up. Okay, some form of structural change, which is disruptive. You change the law, you change fundamentally how people act, see, or behave, versus incremental, letting change happen slowly across many years or many generations, perhaps, and then eventually leading to an acceptable change, right? So these are both journey debates because both of you agree on the same kind of destination that you want to get to. It's a question of how you reach that destination. Okay, so just to make some quick differences here at this point, incremental change, right, will be slower. Incremental change will have less resistance because things happen slower, right? Incremental change also focuses on issues where it's more trade-offs. So it's not really principal values, right? That helps you if it's an incremental kind of situation. Like we incrementally want to lose weight or something, for example, then it's not such a big deal if I don't lose that much weight. If I do it slowly, yeah, that's fine, that's good. Okay, but if you're trading off on something essential, like a value, like a right, then it's a kind of harder bullet to bite, right? Because you're going to say, I'm going to give up some of these rights now, and then later on, I will get some of them back. Although these are perfectly valid approaches. Like in the struggle to combat racism, the civil rights movement, people disagreed about how quickly that change needs to happen because they worry that if change happens too quickly, it can lead to rejection, and then that sets the movement back. Okay, and that's the arguments against disruptive change. On disruptive change, you say that the problems are structural. Things need to break before attention happens. That if change that is too incremental can actually normalize a bad situation, because you just get used to it, and it makes it harder for you to change. Right? On the disruptive approach, you take a position of values and principles. You say these things can never be sacrificed, should never be sacrificed, and that's the way you change perception, you change ideas by disrupting and by shaking things up. Okay? So at the end of the day, it will again come down to your context. Are people ready for this or not? And even some people who are on the incremental camp, let's say you've opposed a kind of policy, you think it's too much too soon, meaning that after a while, you're okay with a little now, but after a while, you're okay with doing more, right? So it could be a position of when we are in society. And these things become very complicated because it's hard to say exactly when. It's hard to draw benchmarks. It's hard to have a clear kind of marker that say once you reach this point, things are okay, right? But that's what makes it interesting. You talk about signs of societal readiness. So how many people in opinions and in surveys, how many leaders are saying these things, how the other side is reacting to this side at this point. And those things can be used, can be argued and discussed of as societal markers, right? And to talk about why you're ready or you're not ready for the change, okay? But at the very basic level is whether or not it should happen very quickly or it should happen very slowly. So again, if this problem is very urgent, then it helps you on the disruptive side, right? Because problem is urgent. If the problem is not urgent, helps the incrementalist slow people, right? The debate will also come down to which one of these things is more sustainable. Intuitively, you would think change that is incremental can be more sustainable because it happens slowly, it doesn't shock people, it's more likely to continue and change for the long term. You can also maybe even get a diversity kind of approach. Incremental change can involve more people because it's happening incrementally. Disruptive change will happen very quickly and may not necessarily involve that many people. Okay, so that's basically on a broad picture of incremental versus disruptive change. Now let's look into a few examples and see which one of these, how they work out compared to each other. So 3 motions here that I think apply. The first one is this House believes that progressive politicians in socially conservative countries should tolerate racism, bigotry in order to gain political influence. Secondly, this House would completely ban all forms of smoking. And thirdly, this House would ban religious and ethnic schools. Okay, so all of these are about how change should happen, incremental or disruptive, and let's look at them. So the first one is a trade-off. These politicians are progressive. They want to gain political influence, but society is socially conservative. So that means society is, well, based on this motion, kind of racist and bigoted. So should these politically conservative guys give up some of their values, assuming that they have these values, so that they can gain power, and then eventually in the long run, make some kind of slow changes? Or should they say no, never, and be against the entire system? Okay, so that's a classic kind of trade-off between the incremental and the disruptive, right? You want to sacrifice some values now so that in the long run you can create better change for everyone, or never sacrifice values, change the system, rock the Casbah from now, right? The second debate is slightly different. It wants to take a strong, hard position, right? So it says ban all forms of smoking rather than incrementally reduce the number of people who smoke through campaigns, through taxes, through restrictions on where you can smoke. All of these other things incrementally reduce the number of smokers. The argument that you'll make here is that it's become normalized, that the rates of smoking haven't really reduced beyond a certain point, or that it's reduced a certain point enough that we can drop it, right? So if the incremental thing has worked, then the number of smokers are low now, so we can completely get rid of them because there's no real value from smoking. Or the incremental thing hasn't really worked, number of smokers increasing, it's time to turn up the heat and completely ban. Okay, so the gov side there would be the disruptive. The op would be taking an incremental approach, say smoking is bad, yeah, people still have a right to do it though, but even if you want to change, there's still many other things we can do to incrementally lower the number of smokers. And why that's better, less rejection, etc., etc. Okay? Last debate about banning religious and ethnic school. So this is kind of like an inclusive-exclusive frame too, right? And I picked this also to show you how you can have different approaches. And banning all forms of smoking is also a top-down versus bottom-up approach. I hope you caught that already. But in the banning religious and ethnic schools, you're looking at how integration happens, right? And remember, when we talked about inclusive versus exclusive, we said that in an exclusive environment, even though you have your own school, eventually it builds more confidence, and then you want to integrate with the rest of society. So that's an incrementalist approach to change, right? I'm okay if people are separated now, if I feel that separation will lead to more integration later. Versus the other side says that no, the separation is bad, you need to break it. You need to force the integration to happen, right? Because this separation only then ensures more people become, separated for a longer period of time. What we need to do is disrupt it. So you have to go and meet all these new things and do these new cultures of people, and that kind of disruption is more positive. Okay, so 3 examples of change that can happen incrementally or change that can happen from a disruptive perspective, right? Let's look at one of these things and get into some detail. I picked this topic because I like it, because I know some people who do this, so I kind of want to talk to them. If you're listening, you know who you are, or if you don't, then it's okay. This house believes that progressive politicians in socially conservative countries should tolerate racism and bigotry in order to gain political influence, right? So it's a change about whether or not people should sacrifice some individual values, individual values. So, I really don't like racism, or I don't like, the patriarchy or something, but I'm going to pretend that I do, or I'm going to, not attack it that much. I'll tolerate some of it because that will give me more mainstream support, right? Because society is socially conservative, right? Society is a little racist. So I don't want to attack too much of it so that I can gain more power. Because if I attack it now, I will lose power, right? I will immediately fall out because society is socially conservative. And then there will be no way that I can change, right? So this debate, you have to establish a few things in that context from the start, the social conservatism of society, and describe that society, pick some countries, right? So this debate will apply to like countries that are very religious, conservative. Actually, many countries tend to be very conservative, but like this is a debate in countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Pakistan, right, India, those kinds of countries where social religious conservatism is used in politics to gain political support, right? So you have to establish that. On the Gulf side also, in this debate, you talk about why the political influence is important. You support a change, a kind of top-down change, right? And you think that's the best approach to change. You think that you need to be on the inside in order to create change to the bottom, right? So that's also a different frame that you're applying in this debate, right? And in the OPU world, you're not top-down, you are bottom-up, okay? But we're going to focus on the disruption part here, right? So in terms of definitions, I think that's what you really need to do. You can cover your side a little bit by going through what you mean by tolerate, okay? So you're not here to like kill black people or you promote actively like segregate society and destroy minorities, but you're talking about making choices. So it doesn't mean that you can never speak up against racism. Sometimes you will, but how much do you actively like combat it, right? So will you cooperate with a racist party? Will you be part of racist party in order to move up if that party is in power? For example, will you support racist legislation if it helps you move up, right? So it's a trade-off here for you on the Gulf side. And your stance here, slow and steady, long-term change, okay? You're going to show that this is the most sustainable, successful, workable approach to change, right? So on Gulf side, you're a bit of a realist. You have a lot of these values, but you think values don't help you if you can't actually put them into change. So let's look at the arguments. Here we go. Number one, to change a conservative society, you need to do it from a position of trust. Number two, you need government. So this is your why we want top down. And number three, and this is a slightly more principled approach, that you want to prove that progressives and conservatives can collaborate and can work together, right? So in turn, number one, to change a conservative society, you need to do it from a position of trust. So on Gulf, you leverage this all the way, right? That society is conservative, they're not going to vote for progressives. In order to change, you need to do that from a position of trust. You talk about how people are very judgy, that these things are ingrained in politics, that they will never ever vote for someone who has, say, progressive values on gay rights, right? In a very religious country, for example. And even if that person does, they kind of have to hide it for a while in order to gain this trust, to gain popularity, right? And even in developed countries, people do this. For example, the president of the United States of America needs to be a church-going person who has religious values. It's very hard for him, and it's mostly him, so far it's always been him, to say that I'm an atheist and I don't really believe in God, right? And even though America is a secular country, most of the voters want a president who is at least spiritual, right? So you need to position yourself in the most acceptable form to the majority of the people. And that's what you argue democracy is about, right? Now, you also say if this doesn't happen, you create backlash, right? And it's not going to be able to be sustained. Because if I get up so even if I have really good ideas, but if people can't accept the fact that, I'm arguing for, gay rights because I'm socially conservative, for example, then I may be voted out, right? And I will suffer and my party will suffer and so on and so forth, okay? So this is your trade-offs argument. I'm going to trade off some of my principles now for in the long term gaining more political power. And because that's the only way I'm going to be able to change the conservative society, because I can gain their trust. Once I have their trust, then I can change them, right? Then I can change them from a position of being one of them. then they can be like, yeah, this guy is one of us, and if he believes so and so, then I can trust. Otherwise, conservative society will feel like that change is being imposed. Like, you don't understand us, even though you're from the same country, you're different. You watch too much MTV, right? So you be bought in to like Western propaganda. You are not one of us. You're not going to change us. They reject you and your ideas, right? So that's the first big debate about how you create change. You need to be part of the people in order to create change. Second argument, you talk about the need of government. So this is your top-down approach, that we can't destroy government. The society becomes really unstable. That you need the society to kind of carry on, even if the government is like racist and bigoted. The government still provides like a very powerful function. And if we try to break people's trust in government or break government, then it creates a more unstable society, which actually harms a lot of people. So your net harm is still, it's the same. Even if I can recognize some rights, if government fails, then it's very, very problematic. But you also say that people are afraid of instability. If you can show them that change doesn't lead to instability, it's more likely they want change, right? Because as much as people like change, people don't really like to change. People want things around them to be different, but they don't really want to become different, right? So if you can show that the government will still be strong and still be stable and still, collect taxes and provide services and give you water and safety and all of those things, then they are more likely to shift and change their mind and open their values. Otherwise, they are more likely to be close and reject them, right? So that's your second part about why you need government. And you're doing this to show why the political influence and through government is important. Thirdly, and I think this is a nice principle kind of argument you can throw in, and that is how you can, to show that progressives and conservatives can work together, right? They can be happy and they can kind of coordinate. And even though I disagree with your ideas, I can still put my personal principles and stuff aside to look at the larger picture. And the larger picture is we need a strong government. We need bigger, more important values. Like, yeah, I disagree with you on, on gender issues. I disagree with you on sexuality and maybe even race and ethnicity. And I seem to be disagreeing with you on a lot of things, but I agree with you on like national security, or I agree with you on education, or I agree with you on development and industry and infrastructure, blah, blah, blah. So I'll work with you on the things that I agree with you, because I think those things are really important and benefit all of society and so on and so forth. And this shows people that those who have different principles and values can still collaborate, and that is a positive thing in society. See, many, many hearts. Okay? So that's the arguments from the Gov approach here on the incremental change. And the biggest benefit here is how you need to show that this is the more likely path to change. That in order to get the people who really disagree with you, they are not going to change their minds if you suddenly show something different. So show something really small, then they can change a little bit. And then they change a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. And that's how change happens sustainably, or that's how change happens at all, right? And that's the position that you take from Gov and why it will lead to long-term benefits. What about from OP? From OP, you take a far more principled approach. You say, like, look, some things are just wrong, and people shouldn't sacrifice their personal principles and values. If I really think that racism is wrong, that, sexism is wrong, that discriminating somebody based on their sexuality or their age or whatever it is wrong, then I shouldn't put those principles aside. I should put those principles on my sleeve, on my arm, and push that way into society, right? Because if I don't, and I'm supposed to be a progressive politician, then people will lose the distinction between progressives and conservatives, and you're not going to create change in society, right? So on OP here, on the disruptive approach, much more principle and hardcore, and much more for like a disruptive change. So you don't think the system is going to change slowly. You think the system will normalize to bigotry and racism, right? And that's your different frame of mind. You pretty much defend the status quo. I don't think you need to propose anything specific. Let's look at the arguments, okay? So firstly, I think the principle, racism and bigotry are principal issues. you must send a strong message. Secondly, this will reduce trust in a leader's honesty. And you talk about why that's really, really important going forward, why these principles are important in politics. And thirdly, it discourages other progressive minorities from reaching out. So it makes your coalition building and stuff much harder. Delicious. So first one, hit that principle, right? Principle issues. Principles should never be set aside. Principles are valuable. You need the principle approach. If people put aside these principles, they may put aside other principles, and why you need to send a strong message. So more than just from like why principles are principles, if people really want social change, the change doesn't come from just passing a law, right? In order to pass the law, you need people to believe that these things are wrong. If you take a consequentialist, utilitarian approach to principles, then why shouldn't other people do the same thing? So if you say I can be racist now, or I'll work with racists, or I'll ignore racism for a while in order to develop something else, to develop the economy, then an individual can make that same choice, right? I can say I'm going to be racist now in order to develop my personal economy. I'm going to support and justify some racism in order to improve my situation and my condition. I'll justify some sexism in order to improve my condition, my wealth, my fortune, my personal happiness. So I can be consequentialist, utilitarian about these principles. And that's a problem, right? So you take this line, I think, very hard and very strong, that if you want to change society, and that's what you want, this change needs to happen from this principle approach, because you want people to believe in these principles, that these things are always wrong, right? And if you don't, you normalize it. You normalize a bad situation by saying that that's acceptable, that there's always something bigger, because there will always be something bigger. No one's ever going to have completely enough money or enough safety or enough all of these things. And you're going to say like, we don't have enough of that, so we need to put down some of these things. Argue also from op that this is important because the problems can be structural. That bad laws encourage bad attitudes, and you can't really get into that. As long as you're supporting a bad law, that bad attitude is going to continue. And people who consistently think of these things need to break them in order to really help others, right? So sexism is a structural issue. Racism, structural issue. Individuals can't tolerate it in order to change it. That's counterproductive, hypocritical. Okay. Secondly, talk about how from a personal perspective, it reduces trust in that leader's honesty. You'll never be able to trust that leader again. And talk about why trust is really important, not just to change these principal issues, but in a democracy, right? Individuals maybe can hide some things, be hypocritical, blah, blah, blah. But that's what in the long run we don't want, right? That's what leads to people not trusting politicians and having apathy for government. They don't believe them, and trust in like the developed world in politicians is at an all-time low. You think that they are all hypocrites who say whatever they want. And if you are justifying hypocrisy this way, it leads to a weaker form of politics. And this leads to weaker forms of government, right? And this is where you try to use it against their government approach. You don't have to say, and you can take this approach that I think government's failed. We don't want to change through government because government is part of the structure that is creating this unfair, broken society. But you're not improving government because in the long run, you're going to remove trust in government. You don't make government a principal actor. You make government a utilitarian, selfish actor. And it's hard then for us to say like, people are, once they move up, they're going to change government because government isn't really what is affecting everybody because people distrust government. So it is not going to make a huge difference to me that this guy who now suddenly says like, oh, all of you should respect other races. Because wait a minute, dude, like a couple of years ago, you were like tolerating it because it helped you. So maybe you're doing it because it helps you now, right? Why should I trust you? I'm not going to trust you. I'm not going to trust anything that you say. And here you extend to like a slippery slope and talk about other issues and why trust is really, really important. Okay. So that's a good argument about how it helps that change, whether or not you get that change in the short term. but also in the long term of what's better for politics. Thirdly, talk about how it discourages progressive minorities. Maybe other people are also progressives and everybody's like keeping silent about their progressiveness. And if some of these people speak up and take principle lines, maybe this will waken up other people, right? So the only way the minority is going to expand is if they organize, if more people come together. That's how you shift the progressives from the minority into the majority. So you say that this policy is going to keep socially conservative, bigoted, racist countries the same. Because even if people are progressive, they are going to keep quiet, right? So whoever progressives are now that choose to speak end up being in the minority and never end up getting enough support, right? So we need to disrupt the situation, speak up and hold on to your values. And that's the only way you're going to shift from being a minority to a majority, right? So I think this is where you also show the whole change coming through. So a change comes through here from like two perspectives, right? From one, here, in terms of sending a strong message, when you take strong principles, other people respect principles, and then they're going to say like, okay, so I need to believe it, everybody's created equal, I can't judge individuals, you shouldn't have some people who have some race, shouldn't have more rights than another person of a different race. And here, it's going to help other people step up, right? So even the majority in that oppressive race is going to step up and say like, yeah, you're right, what we're doing is bad, I have like race privilege and I can't keep using it, so I will change. And that way the social conservatism in the society will change and political influence and power will shift, right? So that's the disruptive approach, right? You have to show that the problem is structural, and the incrementalist approach only makes that problem stronger. Okay, so there we go. 3 different debates, one in depth, all about, and more at the top, incremental versus disruptive change, right? Now, it's not that one of these things is always better and the other one, you know, always worse, or a situation where clearly you need to do this or you need to do that, right? It will come down to the context. It will come down to what kind of problem you're trying to solve, come down to how you can better argue it. But you have a frame, right? Spot a debate where you know whether you're on the incremental side or you're on the disruptive side, and then use this to better shape your context and come up with those classic arguments which you can then use. In the real world, when you really want to solve a problem, you at least now have these 2 different approaches that you can use, and ask yourself which one is better suited to creating change. Because change isn't just about when we argue it in debates. Change is about us actually doing it in society, because, you know, talking about this stuff is useless. You really need to do something. So good luck with all the social change that you are implementing. Bring it. Let's bring it.